So now you know enough about the Go programming language to start working with some of the code from the standard library more easily. We might have been able to start before, but before you knew funcs, before you knew pointers, that could throw you off, before you knew methods and make it hard to read the standard library. So now what I want to do is just take a couple of examples and look at how we use the standard library to start integrating that pre-written code into our applications. And so some of the things that we're going to look at might be like we're going to look at marshalling and unmarshalling to JSON. That might be a little bit new to you. It might be new to you. Maybe you've never worked with JSON before. JSON is a way that we could take our data, put it into a certain data structure, which is commonly used for, transferring data between applications. And we could turn it into that data structure, the JSON data structure, or we could bring it back from JSON. So we're going to see how to do that. And we're also going to see when looking at JSON how the case of identifiers in our program, so the identifiers for variables and for constants, the case of that is going to determine whether or not something is visible or not visible outside of our program. So we'll see that in action. So the first one we're going to start out with here is JSON, and you can learn all about the different packages in the standard library by going to golang.org and then going to documents. I did that kind of quick. Going to documents right here. And then once you're at documents, scrolling down and you have package documentation. So here's the language specification, here's effective Go, and here's package documentation. So these are all the different packages that are available as part of the Go programming language. It's kind of like, hey, you get all this good stuff with it. And here in encoding, the encoding package, we have another package, JSON. And so that's the one we're going to be looking at. But I like using godoc.org instead of golang.org. And at godoc.org, I'm going to enter /encoding and then /JSON, and that's going to take me to the package. And so that's just something you learn to, know where the packages you like to use are. You learn where they are, and then you could just type them in directly and it'll take you right there. Alternatively, if I didn't know where it was, I could have searched up here at godoc.org and hit enter. And then that's going to bring me there. And you can see here I have encoding, JSON. I could click on that and it brings me there. One of the first things that you want to do when you come to a package is just look up in the top right corner here. You have your index, you have examples, and then you have files right here. And so if we click on these, we're taken to some important parts of the documentation here at Godoc. So files, if I click on files, here are the package files. And I could actually see the code that is used to create this package. So I could come in here and I could look at the code that the people who created this programming language wrote to see how did they implement what they were implementing. And so you could dig through here, and this is a great place to come and look just to see how the creators of the language used the language to create their packages, to create the language. So that's kind of a nice thing. Files right up there. And then there's also often examples, and you could come in, you could take a look at examples. And then the index is another place I like to look. So here we have Marshal and we have Unmarshal. So those are two examples that get us going using marshalling and unmarshalling. And so for marshalling here, we have a struct and its type color type, right? We have the keyword and then the identifier and struct, and this user-defined type is called color group, and the underlying type is struct, and you can see that that's capital. So that means this is going to be viewable outside the package. It'll be able to be exported from the package. These are also capital, which means they'll be viewable exported from the package. And then we have a group is equal to color group. In color group, we have the fields, right? And then we have the values. And so here's our composite literal. So there's the type, curly braces, and then the values in between. And we're naming our fields, and we have the trailing comma. And then we do JSON. From package JSON, the dot notation, we're going to use the Marshal function. And we're passing in groups. We're passing in group right there. And we're catching B and an error. And so error handling in Go, we haven't talked about that yet. But you check your errors right after the place where where error would be returned. And that allows you to have really close association between what has happened and where the error occurred. It's not like you have some try-catch way down at the bottom of the code, and it's not like you're just looking for exceptions, right? Exceptions kind of denote that this is something exceptional and it doesn't occur on a regular basis. Error checking should be something that occurs not on an exceptional basis, like every now and then, right? Error checking should be something that occurs on a regular basis. Should always be checking your code for error. And so a lot of things are going to return some value and an error to tell you if everything went well or didn't go well. You don't want to throw your error away. You want to check it. And so you just say, hey, if error is not nil, meaning if there is an error, if the error is not nothing, right, we're just going to print that error out here. And then to OS, operating system standard out, we're going to write whatever that value was. And so the output will be this. And that turned our struct here, that turned our struct into JSON. So that's pretty neat. And then if we saw Unmarshal, we have an example for Unmarshal also. If we go to examples and look at Unmarshal, we have this one right here. So we have a slice of byte, right? And then a raw string literal. And then inside here, we have brackets. And then we have this code here. And so this is like a JSON representation of, this is an array in JSON of different objects, right? And these objects have name value pair. And so that's going to come back and be able to translate into some struct. And so that slice of byte, right, in this raw string literal, this is conversion right here. So here we have a raw string literal, that's a string, and then we're converting it to a slice of byte because we saw that a string is a sequence of bytes. And so we could convert that to a slice of bytes. We're storing that here. And then type animal struct is a struct, right? User-defined type. Here's the keyword, the identifier, and then the underlying type is a struct. And it has these two fields, name and order. And then we have var animals is a slice of animal. Okay, so there's that one. And then we're going to JSON unmarshal into JSON blob. Oh, we're going to unmarshal the value JSON blob into animals, which is a slice of animal, right? So there's animal, here's a slice of animal. Now marshal into that, this data into that. And you have to give it the address to marshal into it. And so here, that's what gets marshaled into there. And then the output, here we check the error, we see if there's any error. And then the output, printf %v, and there's a little plus sign. We could go look what that sees, what that does. But %v and then animals, and it prints out that data structure. So basically what it did is it gave us a slice. Here's the slice, and the slice is of different structs with values in it in Go. So that's marshal and unmarshal. Pretty cool. So last thing we would look at here at the index is how to read the index. And one thing I'm just going to do right off the bat is search for func. And so I'm searching for func right there. And when I search for func, I could see all of the different functions that I have. And so a lot of different functions there. And when I look at this, I'm looking for marshal and unmarshal. So now I'm going to search for marshal. And I'll do this when I'm reading the documentations. I'll sometimes just search for words and look at the index to see what's in the index there. And so here we have marshal. And we also have unmarshal. And marshal is going to take a value of any type, that's the empty interface, and it'll return a slice of bytes and an error. And we saw that with the example. Let's just go back and look at that example, marshal. And it gave us that slice of bytes right there. And with OS standard out write, it asked for a slice of bytes. So that totally worked. If we wanted to, we could convert that slice of bytes to a string. So that's marshaling, and then unmarshaling is going to take the data, which is a slice of bytes. And so a slice of bytes is like right next to what a string is. So often you'll go from a string to a slice of bytes, or you'll go from a slice of bytes to a string. But here's unmarshal, and we have the slice of bytes, and then we also have an interface, and it returns an error. And if you look at the documentation on this, right, this is a little bit tricky, and you have to really pay attention to the wording. Every word counts. So unmarshal, the documentation for unmarshal says, unmarshal parses the JSON encoded data and stores the result in the value pointed to by V. That means that this has to be a pointer. That needs to be an address, a pointer to some type, where some type value of that type is stored. And so when we looked at that example, we saw here in Unmarshal that we had to pass in an address because it's a value pointed to, right? Value pointed to, so we needed that address. And it's just that one word. You know, let me find that again here. Hold on. It's just that one word right there, and stores the result in the value pointed to by v. That's pretty subtle. You can't miss that this needs to be an address right here. So that's kind of cool for Marshal and for Unmarshal. And last thing I'll say about this documentation, and then just because I want to keep these videos short, in the next video we'll apply the Marshal and Unmarshal, and I'll code that up in person and kind of talk through this again. But the last thing I want to say is that if you look here, you can see that we have methods. So if we have a type pointer to decoder, then we have all of these methods available. So if we have a value of type pointer to decoder, then we have all these methods available. If we have a value of type pointer to an encoder, then we have all these methods available to work with. So that's just like another thing I start to look for when I look at documentation. You know, it's like, okay, to use any of these methods, I have to get a value of type pointer to decoder. And if I use new decoder and pass in a reader, right, it's going to give me that. And once I have that, I'll be able to do things like decode. And so that's one of the ways I look at the documentation when I come to the documentation. All right, so that's a little bit of an introduction to using the Go programming language in conjunction with the standard library and starting to make sense of the standard library, which is stuff that you know how to do now, right? You know, here we know these are methods. We know that these are pointers. That is a pointer to type decoder, so the address where the value of type decoder is stored. And, you know, you can see that those are methods. It's cool. You know, these are parameters, and that's a return. You know, these are returns, multiple returns here, slice, a byte, and an error. So, so some nice stuff. All right, so the next couple of videos, we'll work with Marshal and Unmarshal.